Well, welcome. This is our second section of the Messianic Seal of the Jerusalem Church. I hope that you have enjoyed this series as much as I have. I'm going to continue reading here. I'm doing these section by section, and we'll hopefully be able to get more videos. I'm shooting for one video a week if I can do that. So we finished with the introductory materials, some interesting stories there about how this all came about. And now we are on part one, the Messianic Seal of the Jerusalem Church, the rediscovery of the first century sectarian center of James the Just, the Apostles and the Nazarenes on the throne of David, Mount Zion, Jerusalem, by Reuben Ephraim Schmaltz. Okay, so I've got an author's note here. Some of my friends and colleagues, both Jewish and Christian, who for editorial, promotional, or other professional reasons have read my manuscript, have asked me what were my intentions presenting this work. For some, this was a religiously loaded question to which I must give a clear response. Although I have documented this discovery essentially for the Christian reader, deeming it essentially pertinent now at the dawn of the third millennium, I have taken pains to express myself exclusively in secular historical tones. My intention has been to present the current conclusions of a 25-year study in a manner that it is as religiously unbiased as humanly possible. My quest has been for historical truth, and that alone. It is my intention to follow up this synopsized work, as time permits, with a full book-length exposition of research. There is much of this incredible story that remains to be told. My purpose is not to propagate any religious dogma or doctrine, but to turn the page on a lost chapter in history, to put down the lie of anti-Semitism, and to break down the walls of prejudice between man and man to the edification of all. As always, mankind can only profit from being better informed. Okay, and there's his initials. So, introduction. My interest in this archaeological find is decidedly historical. A lifetime private student of history, nearly all of my free or hobby time has been spent in this pursuit. My occupation is professional artist. It's got that in brackets. The subject of my choice is late Second Temple Messianism. In my opinion, this period from approximately 200 BCE to 300 CE is probably the most dynamic and volatile time in the history of the world. In this period, acute Messianism arose and took the world by storm. In two tremendously bloody uprisings, the tiny nation of Judah, which held the land bridge between the continents, rocked the mighty Roman Empire to its core. When the smoke cleared in the 4th century, the age-old pantheon of pagan gods had fallen to the dust at the feet of the world-wandering Jew, Paul. In one way of thinking, it was Judea that had conquered the empire and not vice versa. In 313, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. In these short few centuries, the world was forever dramatically changed. A new worldwide culture was born, which has lasted up to this modern day. After destroying Judea, massacring and enslaving many of its citizens, this mighty empire would, within a mere 300 years, from the time of Yeshua, adopt a messianic form of the very Elohim that it had most ruthlessly tried to destroy. Even more absurd, the deposed, quote, people of the book, unquote, would then be relentlessly persecuted over a period of nearly 2,000 years through pogroms, expulsions from occupational guilds, ghettoizations, blood libels, laws forbidding access to higher education or political office, expulsions, burning at the stake, crusades, the slaughter of entire communities, and forced conversions, capped off with the Holocaust of annihilation. This calamity was served to the tiny Jewish nation in the name of its own God. Having said this, the saga begins. Okay, so number one, to the end of the Messianic revolt when the empire adopted Christianity. Okay, and then two, I guess this is referring to the location of Israel. The King's Highway between Europe, Asia, and Africa. Israel actually sits upon its own continent-like piece of earth crust west of the Syrian-African Rift Valley. This valley is the deepest and longest dry land crack in the Earth's surface caused by some prehistoric cataclysm. The whole valley, from the Galilee to below the Dead Sea, was once literally a lake of fire. where the earth opened up her mouth. Sodom and Gomorrah. Interesting. All right, so the backdrop. Alexander the Macedonian, surnamed the Great, had pushed his armies across most of the then known world, conquering nation after nation and planting advanced Hellenistic Greek centers in his wake. Upon his untimely death, Alexander's empire was divided among his generals. I think there were 4 generals, as I recall: Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy. What am I missing? Anyway, there's 4 of them. In Alexandria, Egypt, the Ptolemies ruled, and in Syria and Levant, power fell to Seleucids. There we go. In 173 BCE, Antiochus Epiphanes, the Seleucid king, performed the misdeed that, although barely noticed by historians, sparked the Messianic revolt that would rise to a raging inferno and engulf the whole world. He deposed Onias III, the reigning hereditary high priest of the house of Zadok. This was the anointed of Yahuwah, whose sacred duty it was to teach the nation of the Torah of Elohim and stand before the mercy seat between the cherubim, to receive atonement for his people. The house of Zadok, appointed to the high priestly office in perpetuity by David and then by Solomon at the dedication of the first temple, was in a state of debilitating shock. If this were not enough, Epiphanius proceeded to sell the holy office to the highest bidder, a non-Zadokite priest. The high priestly office under the anointing of Yahuwah was forbidden to any other son of Aaron, and any other impostor would be considered illegitimate, and the temple over which he presided profaned. Okay, so we've got some notes here. Hebrew Messiah, and then we've got Yahuwah is the only God among the deities of the ancient world that had no earthly or describable image. The Tetragrammaton, also, unlike the names of the pagan gods, is not a title or description of some power, rulership, or deity. The ineffable name, in fact, is not a noun, but a verb, or a verb intransitive, expressing ultimate infinity. Contrary to the insistence of some that the true and only pronunciation of the name is Yahweh, seeing that this name connotes concept rather than title, the various verb spellings throughout the Hebrew Bible include yeh, Yahuwah, Yahu, Yehu, Yah, Yo. My 2 youngest children are variously named Rinat Yah, joy or song of Yah, and Shamar Yahu. Yahu has watched over me. The name connotes existence, past, present, and future. In the great I am verse, Exodus 3:13, 15. Okay, so that's where Moses is standing before the burning bush, and he says, Who shall I say sent me? And it says, I am that I am. Or he says, who are you? The voice answers back, I am that I am. Aye, Asher, Aye. It's the idea of being above even time, being a constant with no beginning or end. Yahuwah proclaims his name, Aye, Hey, Yeh, in the process of being. Okay, so this here is showing that part in question, Shemot or Exodus 3, Vayomer Elohim El Moshe, Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. So that's it right there. Okay, so that's in 14. And said Elohim to Moses, Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. Okay, so this is what they're talking about. Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. Okay, so there it is there. It means in the process of being. Actually, it means the idea of self-existent one, I think is what that's getting at. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. This name concept thus connotes the very ultimate, all-encompassing and infinite essence of existence itself and the continuing process of being. In many of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the sacred name is inscribed in the original archaic Proto-Hebrew script and not in the new, for the time, Aramaic script of the text. So this would be like Paleo Hebrew here, Proto-Hebrew script. This name was so sacred to the sect as not to be transliterated from the original Semitic script. Okay, so apparently they kept the same idea. I think they're talking about the Qumran community, the Dead Sea Scrolls. So essentially, they kept the same idea of not using the name, pronouncing the name, or perhaps writing the name, transliterating it. Okay. Soon after this, Epiphanius proceeded to cancel the high priestly office entirely and outlawed under the penalty of death the practice of the Jewish religion. Epiphanius, in June 168 BC, desecrated the temple in Jerusalem, offering swine's flesh upon the altar, setting up an idol of Jupiter Olympius. He dedicated the temple to this pagan deity. These deeds by Antiochus IV Epiphanius they've got this spelled Epiphanius, but I've always pronounced this Epiphanes. Epiphanius, I guess. So it's not Epiphanius, it's Epiphanius. Sorry about that, folks. It's not as in Epiphanius, the guy that wrote the catalog of all the sects. Of course, that's totally different time here. We're talking about Epiphanius. Epiphanes. Okay, Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay, so Epiphanius proceeded to cancel the high priestly office entirely and outlawed under the penalty of death the practice of the Jewish religion. Epiphanius, in June 168 BCE, desecrated the temple in Jerusalem, offering swine's flesh upon the altar, setting up an idol of Jupiter Olympius. He dedicated the temple to this pagan deity. Okay. So some believe that was like the abomination of desolation, that they hold to that view, and then they limit themselves to that particular time frame. And even some who say, well, this was done even by the Romans, so they hold to that view. They have a linear thinking, and they're prophetic. They don't look at things as patterns, as evolutions of fulfillment. Okay. Obviously, I'm an adherent. I believe in patterns all throughout history, and the Father uses these same types of things, these occurrences. And so Scripture is not, in this view of the idea of the evolution of these fulfillments throughout various times in history, the idea that it's a circular kind of thing, the thing that has been is the thing that will be, and there's no new thing under the sun. Okay, that kind of thinking. Okay, so these deeds by Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the deposing of the high priestly line of Zadok, the desecration of the temple of Yahuwah, and the outlawing of Judaism struck a reverberating blow to the foundations of the ancient Hebraic nation and sacred culture. Onias and the faithful with him spirited away to Leontopolis, Egypt, where by permission of the Ptolemaic authorities, he was given license to build a rival temple to Yahuwah. Isn't that interesting? Here, those faithful to the archaic school could then offer their pure libations. After the temple in Jerusalem had been profaned, a swine sacrificed upon the altar and an image of Zeus set up in its holy precincts. An old priest from the village of Moadine rose to the challenge, slaying a heretic Jew and a servant of the king. He took to the Judean hills with his sons. Boldly, he called all of those to gather to him who would be faithful Israelites and not bend at the knee to pagan Hellenism and to idols. So that's the Maccabees. That's what it's talking about. And you can read about that uprising in Maccabees 1, 2, and 3 and 4 have some other aftermath kind of stuff. I think 4 is a letter John Hyrcanus wrote to the Spartans, if I remember correctly. Okay, so they basically is talking about the Maccabees. So Matthias and his sons after him brought down their swords upon the Greeks, driving out the Seleucids in a whirlwind guerrilla war. The Maccabees took back the temple and established their sovereignty in the land of Israel for a short period. They cleansed the temple and rededicated the sacrifices on the first festival of Hanukkah. Okay, so we have some scriptures here. We can learn about some of these. Existed a hierarchy of priestly families. So you can see that in Ezekiel 40, 46, 43, 19, and 44, 15. Each descended from a separate line of Aaron. Okay, so here's Ezekiel 40:46. And the chamber which faces toward north for the priests who have charge of the altar, those are the sons of Zadok. So that's what we're focusing on. Who come near from the sons of Levi unto Yahuwah to minister to him. So here is Ezekiel 43:19. And you shall give to the priests the Levites who are of the seed of Zadok. Okay, there it is. Zadok. And who approach me, says Yahuwah. Oh, it's Adonai there. They've got Adonai Yahuwah. To minister to me a bull, a son, that's a younger bull for a sin offering. Okay, a male bull. Okay, so here's the last one, Ezekiel 44:15. But the priests of the Levites, the sons of Zadok, who kept charge of my sanctuary, then when went astray the sons of Israel from me, they shall come near me to minister to me, and they shall stand before me to offer to me the fat and the blood, says Adonai Yahuwah. Okay. Okay, so there existed a hierarchy of priestly families, each descended from a separate line of Aaron. Okay, so then we've got a thing here from 2 Maccabees 4:25. Okay, so in the book of Maccabees 4:25, this is relative to anyone else would be considered an imposter. In other words, they would be considered someone who is not, should not be there because they're not a true descendant of Zadok. And so here it is, 2 Maccabees 4:25. So having received the king's mandate, he returned, bringing nothing worthy of the high priesthood, but having the mind of a cruel tyrant and the rage of a savage beast. So this guy was a bad guy. As a result, Menelaus returned to Jerusalem. This is who they're talking about, with papers from the king confirming him as high priest. So that is where the breakdown happened, okay, between the sons of Zadok. That's what he's talking about in there. Okay, Daniel 11:31, and arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination and make it desolate. So this is, that's what's interpreted to mean Antiochus Epiphanes doing this in the temple. Okay, so now number 8 here, we've got Josephus gives contradicting accounts as to whether this was Onias III or his son and successor to the high priesthood, Onias the fourth. In one account, Onias III was murdered by Menelaus, the usurper high priest near Antioch in Syria. This agrees with Maccabees and is therefore probably the correct account. Some commentators see Onias as the personage of the teacher of righteousness, and Menelaus as the wicked priest of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, so in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Qumran, the Damascus document, and so on, it refers to this teacher of righteousness a lot in those documents. Okay, so now there's a guy on Facebook, he stylizes himself as Onias, and he has a YouTube channel, studies a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls and so on. That's just a side note, anyway. But this whole conflict is even known today among some people in the religious world. All right, so number 9, this temple to Yahuwah and Leontopolis continued until after the fall of the Jerusalem temple. That's that temple that was talking about these descendants of Zadok, that when Menelaus was installed, they took off, and they were welcomed by the Ptolemaic in Egypt dynasty for a while. And it was closed by Vespasian in 73 CE. Isn't that interesting? Shortly after the destruction of Jerusalem. Wow. Josephus War 7th, 433 to 646. This temple operated for over 240 years, longer than the lifetime of the United States of America. That's interesting. Okay, so the plot thickens. The Maccabees are remembered in Jewish history as national heroes. What again is barely noticed by historians is that in 2 infamous acts, these heroes caused havoc and division in the nation and set the pace for the coming destruction and 2,000-year exile. Well, number one, they screwed up big time because they made, it's like after they beat the Seleucid armies back, the Syrian armies back, they turned right around and got involved with the Romans. You know, that's really a big deal. They shouldn't have done that because the Torah says you should not make treaties with these pagan nations roundabout. So in 152 BC, Jonathan the Maccabees took the high priest office to himself, and in the early years of his successor, Simeon, the high priesthood transferred irrevocably from the Zadoks to the Hasmoneans. Okay, so this was a bad transfer because they were not from the line of Zadok. Considered impostors and usurpers by the Zadokites, the Hasmonean high priests were counted as illegitimate and their offerings in the very temple itself profaned. Okay, so it looks like power went to their heads and they figured, well, we got to control this whole thing because, you know, look what happened when maybe they felt entitled because they had shed a lot of blood in trying to win back the Temple Mount to Jewish control. Who knows? Delegitimized and persecuted by the Hasmonean priesthood, the priests of the line of Zadok removed to the wilderness of Damascus along with an exodus of their followers. Thus were born the sect of the Essenes. Look at that. Banished and left without any foreseeable hope of gaining back their rightful holy seat from the now increasingly Hellenized Hasmoneans, the Essenes set up a community hailing the prophetic banner of Isaiah 43. Okay, let's take a look at Isaiah 43. Isaiah 43, here it is, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. There's Bamidbar, that's actually one of the books of the scriptures. So, prepare the way of Yahuwah, make straight in the desert a highway for your Elohim. There it is, Le Eloheinu, Le Eloheinu, okay. Okay, so, and continuing on, and these shall become a community in Israel according to these rules. They shall separate themselves from the dwellings of the people of Toralessness and go into the wilderness. Prepare there the way of Yahuwah, as it is written, in the wilderness prepare you the way of Yahuwah. These were the first in Israel who waited upon the kingdom of Elohim. Now, this is where a lot of people get the idea that John the Immerser, or also known as John the Baptist, came from this Essene community. Because they the corrupted priesthood was happening during the Maccabees, and then, of course, once the Romans got involved, they put their own guy in power anyway. He's not from the line of Zadok, and so it was the whole thing was corrupted from the top down. Okay. Epiphanes, Jonathan, and Simeon, the concept of anti-Messiah, false anointed, was probably born. Interesting. This is approximately the time that Josephus informs us. If we take 200 years as a rounded number, the Urim and the Thummim cease to answer to Yahuwah's oracle upon the breastplates of the high priest. The Urim no longer shone. Wow. Isn't that interesting? I didn't know that. This breastplate, ironically, was called the Essene. The Hasmoneans belonged to the Jehoram division of priests, not eligible for the high priest's office. Remember, in those other scriptures that we looked at, they have to come from Zadok. The Maccabees, who originally arose in religious zeal and revolted against Hellenism, had by now become increasingly steeped in the alien pagan culture by the time of Yahushua. Their descendants, the Sadducees, had become an elite aristocratic class, devoid of spirituality. Remember, they were the guys that denied the resurrection of the dead, and Yeshua had to correct them. They sold their favors to the highest bidder. Here's something in Dead Sea Scrolls. It was under the same banner that John came baptized for the wilderness. So that's where they get the idea right there. For the Essene background of John the Baptist. Okay, so carrying on. In 1896, Solomon Schechter of Cambridge was handed manuscripts brought from the Geniza of the ancient Karaite synagogue of Cairo. Amongst fragments of work, which will later be discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls at the turn of the century, he found parts of a previously unknown text that would then be called the Zadokite fragment, causing a major stir in the academic world and extensive controversy over the age and historical importance of the text following. After the discovery of the scrolls in 1947, it was recognized that these fragments were part of a copy of the Damascus document found in several copies in the caves of Qumran. This was the Damascus covenant drawn up for those first embryonic Essenes in the wilderness of Damascus. From Damascus to wherever this Essene movement spread, the call went out that the kingdom is at hand. All of the intertestamental, eschatological, and apocalyptic pseudegraphic books were scribed by Essene hands during this late Second Temple times. Okay, so we've got some notes here. Some scholars dispute that this was not a Karaite, but a rabbinical synagogue. In 809 CE, an earlier cache of Dead Sea Scrolls has been found in caves in the same area as Qumran. Upon these scrolls, although not completely understood, the Karaites based their new offshoot sect from rabbinical Judaism. Now, the difference between the Karaites and the Pharisees, or the rabbinical guys, is that they didn't accept any of this oral stuff. They just were looking at Torah, Bereshit to Devarim, Genesis to Deuteronomy. They were looking at as we do it as it's written. We don't add or we don't put a bunch of fences around it. That's the basic idea of these guys. Okay. So this is, he's got a book here, J. Tischer, Journal of Jewish Studies, Volume 2. It looks like Hugh Schofield and Essene Odyssey. Okay. This would be good to look up sometime. It is interesting that Saul was sent by the Sadducean high priest to Damascus to arrest those of the way. I would suggest that those of the way in Essene appellation were not only believers, but included other Essenes. It would be more plausible that he was sent after the Zadokites, the real enemy of the temple priesthood. Well, that's interesting slant on that, isn't it? That perhaps, because remember, blind Bartimaeus would call out to Yahushua, Yahushua ben David, son of David, have mercy on me. Remember, and they tried to shush him up. Well, because that was politically incorrect in that day to be calling anyone as having any kind of kingly attribute, you know, other than Herod. You guys remember the Pharisees were like in the courtyard, we have no king but Caesar, you know. So there's this controversy of who's in control, who's the legitimate power guy, okay? Let's see here. It would be sent up to Zadokite, the real enemy of the temple priesthood. After his conversion, Paul was instructed and then spent 3 years in the wilderness of Damascus before going up and presenting himself to James and the apostles on Mount Zion. The 3-year period was the time needed for one to attend and graduate from the Essene Academy. Paul was a Pharisee. The Essenes followed an entirely different creed. They even had an additional 6th book of Torah. This is the temple scroll opened and deciphered by the famous Israeli scholar and archaeologist Yigdal Yadin. Paul's letters are filled with euphemisms and parallels to sectarian verses and terms used in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Paul's emphasis upon the mysteries, sons of light and sons of darkness, can only have been learned from the Essenes and not the Pharisees. His use of the term angel of Satan corresponds with Essene doctrine, and especially the use of the term Belial, Hebrew, Belial, meaning utter worthlessness, as a proper name for Satan, connected with the light, righteousness, and darkness, lawlessness in the same paragraph. Wow. So if you want to know a little bit about the devil, according to them, you got tortlessness. Well, we already accept that. In the same paragraph, and could have been read right up out of the Qumran scrolls. This is the only place in the New Testament where the Essenes Belial is used in the place of Satan. That's in 2 Corinthians 6:14 through 15. Okay, 2 Corinthians 6:14 through 15. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers, for what righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? Well, that does sound a lot like the Damascus document, doesn't it? What harmony is there between Messiah and Belial? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? This seems to indicate perhaps that Paul did have a lot of contact with the Essene teaching and understanding. Okay, we're going to finish up here. Yeshua also used the term sons of light when contradicting one of the adherents of the way concerning contact with unrighteousness or sons of darkness. Okay, so I'm going to have to stop now. This is a lot of heavy material. I've got an appointment coming up in 10 minutes. So hopefully this will be enough for this coming week, and I'll try to get some more material up for you guys. Okay, well, thanks for joining me, and any comments or anything, put these comments down in our blog or something. Send me a note, shul@hmisrael.net. You'll see the card.